Alright, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm first going to get into some clash, then I'm going to do my extension. So let's look at some clash. Christian brought up what is a human, and I'm going to respond just as quickly as she made the point, being that a human is genetic code, that's it. And I don't care about anything else. She also talked about social consequences and how there needs to be 3 criteria for science to be able to override social considerations. One was that it's necessary. The necessity of genetic engineering is going to be my extension, so I'll get into it later. The second, that it was safe, and that's already been dealt with on the first half. And the fact of the matter is that we have things like the FDA to show that if there are toxic side effects, we can look at them, evaluate it, prevent it from ever getting out onto the market at least. They also said that it has to be understandable. Unfortunately, science has never been understandable. We have never had a full comprehension of what's going to happen when we do something, but that hasn't stopped us before, and it shouldn't be stopping us now because of the necessity of science. They also talked about animal rights, and I'm just going to bring up the fact that there are ethics boards to show that even their examples, such as that ear that was grown on a mouse, was to study tumors. And so as a result of that, it was an incredibly powerful study that created a lot of good research out of it. It was very positive, it was very good. They also said that we need to respect the natural order. And my question is why? And they simply have not answered that, and I'm going to answer to you why we shouldn't care at all. She also completely and utterly bastardized science by saying that crossbreeding is somehow magically different from genetic engineering. But with genetic engineering, you're not creating new proteins, you're not creating new genes. What you're doing is you're taking a gene with a known protein, and that protein has a known function. You are then taking it out of one organism and putting it into a new one. There is no question of what's going to happen in that new organism. There is only 1 or 2 possible effects that protein could have, and that is how you're studying it. But not only that, the more positive side of genetic engineering is reverse genetic engineering, where you knock out that gene to study its relationship on that animal. And that's why we need animal testing, why it is so necessary, because it's the only way that we can actually understand what those genes do in an organism. That ability to comprehend what makes life allows us the ability to manipulate life, which is incredibly important. But also just the idea of that understanding, which is incredibly important, which is something that all scientists, all human beings seek to do.
Sure, perhaps, but why better all science, all restricted access, and not deal with it on a case-by-case basis where we can clearly see a benefit and we see there's little harms?
Because of the point of the fact that how the scientific method works. In order to actually create scientific research, you need to be able to find an observation, test something about that observation, and evaluate that observation. When we start placing arbitrary limits on what you can test, scientists can start seeing things, but because of restrictions placed on them by their government, they can't begin to understand that concept. Therefore, they can't begin to utilize that concept, and you have needlessly and utterly handicapped yourself just because it reminds you of your own mortality. Going back to more examples that Kristen brought up, she also brought up Dolly the sheep. And when Dolly the sheep was cloned, we did actually think that she wasn't going to live very long. And when it was proven that she wasn't, it revealed a lot about telomeres that we didn't know. Telomeres mediate longevity. And so because we were taking adult cells and growing an adult organism from a baby, obviously we have a shortened lifespan. That increased understanding is helping us understand cancer, is helping us understand aging, and doing all sorts of things to help the human condition, which we think are incredibly powerful. So getting into my extension and looking at what is science and why do we do science. So first and foremost, I want to talk about the scientific method, which there are 2 ways of doing. There's methodical science and then there's leaps and bounds science, but both of them use that same method I described earlier. Finding, testing, evaluating, retesting, modifying, evaluating again in a large circle. But what you do when you set restrictions is you force people to go by single steps. The problem with the single step method is that if we look at many of the biological discoveries that we found over the last decade, they've come from leaps and bounds, where someone did something that was totally out of the box. We can look at things like PCR testing. We can look about tons of the ideas of genetic modification, where the ability to go out there and take one gigantic leap forward without having to go through tons of moderation were the things that allow us to create a great deal of prosperity in the scientific realm. We can also look at this idea that if they are stuck into a slow methodology, it slows down the ability of science to progress. And especially in the current era, we need science to progress more quickly. And I'm going to tell you why. First and foremost, to bring up an old example of the Malthusian disaster that was first averted through the development of pesticides, herbicides, and artificial fertilizers. These things which are, again, leaps and bounds, as well as different farming techniques, of course, that allowed for an incredible amount of food to be produced. And as was already brought up, is the fact that food supplies are dwindling in terms of their amount that's needed to be consumed by the human population. In the future, we're going to have a second Malthusian crisis unless we can begin to create plants that are better at nutrient acquisition. plants that grow faster, plants that grow better. And if we don't do things at a rapid pace, if we don't try and create things as powerfully and as quickly as possible, then we're not going to be able to compensate for the rapidly growing human population.
Well, why open up another Pandora's box? Every time we do anything like this, we always have problems come out from it. Why don't we do this gradually and actually get it done?
We've already opened Pandora's box. There are already tons of problems of the human species. We already have so many problems building up on us that sometimes we have to take a step forward and acknowledge, yes, this is going to cause more problems for us in the future. But that solution that we can have right now is something that deals with many more problems that we have right now. Yes, it seems short-sighted, but that ability to go for the long term and say that we'll deal with that hurdle when we reach it. Because that's what science does. When you allow science to be unfettered, once it reaches a hurdle, they take whatever approach they need to get over it. And if it creates new problems, same idea. It's just another hurdle that we can then surmount. And we can always go backwards, as we saw with CFCs, one of their favorite examples. When we did realize, hey, this is a really bad idea, we simply stopped using them. We can also look at the idea of bioweaponry and disease, and one of the primary reasons why we do allow a lot of specialist research is because of the fact that you can do a lot of powerful genetic research in your garage. You can create an incredible diversity of organisms with equipment that only costs you a couple $1,000s. Because of this, there is a massive threat if you don't allow research to continue as quickly as possible in fields such as disease and bioweaponry, because we need to be able to stay one step ahead of people who are trying to hurt us. Or in the case of disease, the ability to use unfettered means of going out as quickly as possible and researching disease is what allows us to create seasonal flu vaccines. That ability to go out there and try anything we can to get that end result, then testing the end result to see if it's harmful. That method of doing genetic engineering is what allows us to compensate for things that rapidly evolve. Because as we pointed out already, we can't compete with 4 billion years of evolution. Bacteria, viruses, and many plants and animals and pests evolve at rates that are incredibly rapid, that are well beyond our ability to adapt by crossbreeding, well beyond our ability to adapt simply by changing our immune systems by the methods that already exist. But by taking the conglomerate 4 billion years of evolution that we understand, by taking all of the weapons that nature has provided us and using them together all at once, we can solve things like food crises. We can use them to solve our environmental issues. We can use them to stop disease. We can use them to stop human aging. We can use them to stop a multitude of things.